Good evening, everyone. I feel very privileged to have been invited along to your meeting this evening. I'm very conscious we're doing this by Zoom, and there's possibly a little bit of death by PowerPoint today. I have an enormous number of slides for you all, and photographs and what have you. Now, I'm very conscious that I'm not a historian, and we have numerous wonderful historians in the Archdiocesan area and in Sydney in general. I am an archivist and I'm curious about people. So I've kind of curated this according to what I think would be interesting. I am so very conscious that many of you would have known His Eminence personally. And I know we're very privileged to have family members here this evening. So please understand that I'm talking about someone who I'm interested in, but you will have an entirely different experience of them. And I'd really like to hear some of your memories and your stories. So, I'll tell you a little bit about the archives as well, and I hope I keep you interested. So I am the Archdiocesan Archivist for Sydney, and I work under the delegated authority of the Chancellor for the Archdiocese, Mr. Chris Meaney. I feel very blessed and privileged to work in these archives, and I've been here for 4 years now. And actually, when I first started was when Brother John Luttrell was just starting to finish up the edges of his biography of His Eminence. And I found myself quite curious. And this curiosity started when he wanted to look at various photos. And I was fascinated by this gentleman that seemed to be quite the jet setter at a very unusual time. So that's sort of what kicked it off for me. So I'd like to give you a little bit of a background to the archives as well. So we hold some of the earliest written records in Australia, and our role is consistent with the provisions of canon law, particularly relating to the keeping and use of diocesan archives. And I feel my responsibility is to ensure that our archives are preserved as authentic evidence of the administrative, cultural, spiritual, and intellectual activities of the Catholic Archdiocese of Sydney. And our holdings primarily include the records of the Office of the Archbishop of Sydney and his various administrative units. And those constitute the core holdings. So we're predominantly paper-based. We do have some artefacts, and I would like to point out that sacred items always belong in sacred spaces. So there will be items that you would think, oh, the archives might have that, but really they belong in the cathedral and they're under the care of the sacristan. So for many years, the records were actually housed in the crypt of St. Mary's Cathedral before they were moved under Cathedral House. Now, what's curious about this is apparently in the crypt, there were various little rooms and pockets that often had a lot of rising damp. Now, only because they're not really the place to hold these precious records. And so I think Sydney in particular understood its responsibilities, but its execution wasn't always with the professional understanding we would have today. And so I think for a long time, that's why the records did move around a little bit. In the 1990s, until that time, they were usually managed by the Archdiocesan Archivist was actually part of the clergy. So they were either priests or sometimes brothers, such as Brother Hall in the 1990s. And they also had numerous volunteers at that time. So things changed again in 2002 when they appointed a professional lay archivist for the first time. And that's where you started to see the change in how the archives and records were actually managed. So in 2013, they moved to a purpose-built facility, that's where I live right now, in the Polding Centre at 133 Liverpool Street. And this is a retrofitted room, actually, and they They got in professional architect designers and what have you, and they put an enormous amount of work into this. And I have to say, professionally, I'd worked here in 2 years at the Diocese of Parramatta, and before that I'd worked in university roles or government, local government and state government level. And I have to say, hand on heart, this is the nicest archive I've ever personally worked in. I have worked in universities where I have had to sort of swim through the crickets to get to the theses I was trying to look for. Other places where I've had to remove ivy and a few redbacks before I could get to things I was after. And as someone who's terrified of snakes, I'm a little bit concerned while working in Australia, but I haven't encountered them. I have a feeling that if we talk about His Eminence, that all of you could probably tell me so much more than what I'm sort of talking about here. And I'd like to remind everybody that I'm not an historian, nor am I an expert, and nor do I claim to be. This list doesn't even touch half of what he achieved, especially when you consider things such as our Catholic schools. Catholic schools in Australia are really unusual. You don't see this in other countries. And I think we have something very special here, and that was created very early on, and he reinvigorated that. I'm fascinated by the years that he lived and the things that he saw and experienced. You know, the honor of becoming a knight commander, you know, that was conferred to him in 1969. You know, he saw the changing world, you know, especially with Vatican II, and the changes from being a radio operator to the coming of television. You know, he controlled media by the merging of Catholic newspapers, saw the advent of the radio station 2SM, and I'm sure the historians among us would debate this, whether this means X or Y, you know, or whether there was some grand design. That's for our historians. I'm inclined to believe he was a gentleman for the moment, a true Australian, and someone who got stuck in and just did what was needed, and steered a very moderate and diplomatic course. And I have been very fascinated by him as a gentleman. So today I've picked things that I think highlight different aspects, and I am so conscious there is so much more than what I've selected today. So I'd like to start with a little photo. And this was a live telecast of Mass, and it was taken in about 1968. And the Mass was actually held with the Genesian theatre actors being the congregation. And I think it's just absolutely fascinating. And especially when you consider the size of the cameras back then and how intimidating it was. And yet here he is doing what needed to be done. So I'd like to jump around on you a little bit. Technical issues. It seemed like a good idea to do this in Zoom, because the reality is if we did a display, they would be all behind glass and you wouldn't be able to get close to them. But as I was planning this talk, I realized just how tricky it all is. Now, you can still all see me, can't you? Yeah, we're all nodding?
Yes, indeed. Yes, we can see you.
Okay, so I'm just going to hold up a photo which I think is an absolutely famous photo. And it's whether or not you can sort of see the difficulties if I try and hold that up and show you. Or at his retirement, this is the booklet of events, and we have a lovely picture, and you can see the problems of I'm not really holding it up well and you can't really see. And just as a teaser, I'm going to show you the menu. And can you even see that? Probably not very well.
Not quite.
No. I tell you what, the menu does look amazing, and and I'm sure we would all enjoy it. Those are some of the things that I kind of encountered. And so that's why I thought, okay, I need to do little snippets of videos, and hopefully that sort of gives you a bit of a sense. So I'd like to just jump in with a family photo. One of the things I found is His Eminence always had very staged photographs, and yet he always looks, in my opinion, so much better in his natural photos when he was talking with someone. And I thought this was just lovely, this photo of him and his sisters. So I'd like to remind us that these are different times. I can't remember the last time I received a telegram. I'm not even sure we can send telegrams anymore. He received so many, and we still have them. And the fact that he would always take the time out to acknowledge someone who actually did write to him is just quite astonishing when you consider how incredibly busy he would have been as an archbishop and then as a cardinal. He was someone who travelled extensively. And so this is a key to the city a key to the city to Manila in the Philippines. I thought I'd just show this to you. And it actually is rather unusual, because you would think, oh, that's actually a ribbon, but it's not. And it's designed to move to give some fluidity to the item, the key. And I find it fascinating that we still have many of these boxes. So what I'd like to do is just now show you a few different ones. So this particular one is a letter opener. Now, this still does not do it any sort of justice whatsoever. The opal in this letter opener was gorgeous. I love jewellery, and it has such a luscious depth of colour that you don't see opals like that. Usually they're quite black, and this one really has such a blue undertone to it. I thought it was really quite beautiful. And it was presented as a token of gratitude, loyalty and affection from the members of the St. Vincent de Paul Society. I mentioned 2SM before, and His Eminence always had his little transistor radio with him. And this is where I think the memories and the reminiscing that people had, I would love to know, did he travel with this, or was this something that was on the bedside table? Sometimes we have the objects, but the stories behind them are so much more. But I do know that he very much drove the idea of 2SM, a strong Catholic radio station. This is another item that we were recently asked if we actually had this in our possession, and I was really delighted to be able to say that we did. However, this photo does not do any justice for the richness of the colours or the delicacy of the tapestry. It's quite astonishing. And I recently had the gentleman that inquired about it, it was one of his relatives that had actually undertaken the work on the tapestry, which I thought was quite interesting. Now, some of our things, I am conscious that today we would not place them on display because, for example, the ones from India have ivory in them, and now there's such concern about the ivory trade and the black market that we have to be much more cautious about these. But I have included them for today. And this particular one was a gift possibly from the 1950 visit for the First Plenary Council of India.
May I ask a quick question?
But wait.
Certainly.
Is that a snuff box?
No, it's much larger than that. I'm quite surprised at the size of it. If I sort of hold up my hands, it's about that big.
Oh, okay. So it's about as big as your head.
Yeah, about half that size. Yep.
That's all I could see on the video.
Oh, sorry. Should I move back a little bit more?
No, it's because your hands are much closer to the camera.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
So I love this photo. I find it fascinating. Air travel obviously was a much more glamorous prospect than what we have enjoyed in more recent years. The rivets on the plane I find ever so slightly disturbing with my modern eyes, but I thought it was a fascinating photo and I really wanted to share that with you. So now this is an inkwell that was given to His Eminence when he was in New Zealand, and it's made from pawa shell, or if you're speaking New Zealand English, you would say pawa. If you're speaking Australian or anywhere else, you would say abalone shell. And it's quite interesting because they've put an incredible amount of work into that. Sorry, I haven't turned the sound off on this one. And yet it's so clear that this is an important gift and they wanted to provide something to him that really represented New Zealand. However, I think how we would see it with modern eyes is that it's like doing that presentation with, say, iron ore. So if you're in a souvenir shop and you find the iron ore earrings and things like that, you would find pawa shell earrings in New Zealand. So for me as a New Zealander, I find it quite fascinating that this was given as such a gift. And it clearly is meant to be of value. I think pawa was obviously seen quite differently in the past to what it is today, perhaps. So my next slide from there. Now, I don't expect anyone to be able to read this, but as I was undertaking my research, I did notice they talked about the program. And as a New Zealander, I also noticed that they say down the bottom, and at 12:30, he will attend a tangi in his honour. A tangi is a 5-day funeral ritual, usually for Māori and the native people of New Zealand, where you would go onto the marae, the meeting house, and the person would lay in state for a number of days before they are buried. This is a tremendous faux pas to have that in a newspaper, and I find it quite shocking. However, I think it's a typo. I think they wrote tangi instead of hangi, and a hangi would be a very special occasion meal where you actually bury your food in the earth and it is cooked underneath the earth. Does this make sense? I thought it was something quite curious and rather unusual.
Yes, that is interesting, and certainly, if as you say, a tangi is a mourning rite, it seems odd that they would be holding one in his honour. So, yeah.
Yes, it really struck me, and of course, with more time, I would like to know, were there letters saying, "Oh, we are so terribly sorry," or did they go, hopefully he doesn't read the newspapers and we'll just pretend it never happened? So I thought it was an interesting one to bring to your attention. So this is a ceremonial mallet on the occasion of the blessing and the placing of the foundation stone at St. Francis Retreat House from the Franciscan Fathers in 1933. And it's still in exceptional order at the moment as well. Are these videos playing okay for people?
I can certainly see them. If anyone is having difficulties, please do sing out. But no, they're really fascinating.
Okay, excellent. So these are wooden bookends, and they were actually made by a Mr. Frank Mills in 1940, and they were to congratulate Cardinal Gilroy on becoming Archbishop. And they're handmade, but the delicacy of the work and the level of work that was put into them is quite extraordinary. And it was quite cool to see how they sort of pull apart, so you could actually place them on the shelf. And yeah, often it's all too easy to lose one bookend to another. Right. So coming back to India, these are some of the ivory items that do not get put on display today. And you'll also see they're damaged, which is really sad to see. But they're quite extraordinary in terms of the level of detail. And so the eggs are actually metal, and the wood's interesting because I'm not entirely sure if they're teak or another hardwood. No, and I'd certainly welcome some feedback on that if people know more as well. This is how we learn so much from our visitors as well, so quite interesting. And they also used to put little scrolls. And so here's one example. Now, normally we would sort of slowly flatten out papers if we were going to store them that way, but they had been kept with the rolls this entire time, and so we've continued to do that as well. And here's another example, and I think it's just quite extraordinary. The work. Oh, did that just disappear? No, let me just go back. Let's try that again. And this one used to sit in my office, but no longer does, I'm afraid. It was in one of the cabinets. I wanted it in a more stable environment, so it has moved, but it was incredibly pretty. But I'm sure you can understand why it doesn't spend time on display these days with our more modern understanding. And you can see the aging of the paper as well. It's probably less air damage and more where the wood has actually leached into the paper. But again, it has been kept together for this entire length of time. And so we will digitize it, but we will probably let it stay with its item. So just to swap back to a photo, another action shot. I find he always had a smile on his face when he was traveling, except for those more formalized photos. And I actually believe he was off to visit a sick family member at this time and was heading towards Lewisham, but he had just come back from Bombay. I can only imagine the heat he would have been in, and when we consider the outfits that he is wearing, it's quite extraordinary. I don't think we're built quite as tough today. His Eminence received numerous medals, and I haven't tried to sort of show them all today, but just to give you a little bit of an idea of how they would be packed. Here's one that we can sort of unpack for you. And I do have still photos that I can sort of show you at a different time, but it gives you a little sense of an idea. And you can imagine just how badly I would have done this if I was trying to do it live, which is how I was initially intending to do most of tonight's talk. I'm hoping I'm showing things that you haven't had the opportunity to see before. Is anyone able to sort of nod if that's the case. Okay, thank you. The giving of medals has definitely died away in more recent decades, but they were very popular for a very long time. And we still do have medals. You know, we also talk about papal medals and the like as well, but things are quite different. I would like to show another medallion. And this was dated from 1967, but it technical issues. Let's try that again. But it's to commemorate 1915. And it was awarded to the surviving members of the Australian forces who served on the Gallipoli Peninsula or was in direct support of the operations from close offshore. And that's His Eminence was a radio wireless operator at that time. And I'll hold up his younger photo again. I just find it incredible how young people that were serving were, and, you know, the awfulness of war and what have you, and what people saw as their duty. But he just strikes me as incredibly young at that time. And we also have another photo for you tonight, and he's over here. And again, so many of the gentlemen in this photo, they look very, very young indeed. So we also have his Return Service Medal, and this was awarded much later, and he became a life member of the RSL. The reason why I'm pausing is because I get caught out with the RSA, which is New Zealand, versus the RSL, which is Australia. And he was very proud of this, I understand. Oops, and sorry, I suspect the play icons must be very close to the bottom, and it just forwards to the next video, to the next page rather. Let's try that again. And these are very small. Now, often I've got Ronnie, who is our assistant archivist. He's often holding these up. So, and he's a tall gentleman, but I think you can probably see this is still a very small pin. So it just gives you a bit of an idea. So one of the things I find interesting about His Eminence is I saw him as being well ahead of his time in terms of recycling papers and being efficient. And I suspect all his training working for the Apostolic Delegate also really instilled in him a sense of ensuring that, you know, the I's were dotted, the T's were crossed and the like. And so here we see a letter where someone has written to him, and he's pointed out his response, and that response would be typed up. On a second one, you can actually see not only the letter that's come through to him and the things he would like to write out to them, but if you look carefully, you can actually see that there's clearly typing on the other side of the paper as well. And this is something you see quite a lot of in the archives when you're trying to determine things. He was a little bit notorious for writing off the edge of papers as well, but I've gotten quite familiar with his handwriting over time. Much easier when he wrote in pen, but he would often write in pencil as well. But I thought it'd be nice to see a sample of his handwriting. So, have people had a moment to sort of have a good look at that? I'm not sure if I'm sort of going too fast or too slow.
No, I think it's just the right pace. Thanks, Lienntje.
Okay. You're all being incredibly kind this evening. Here's another photo with a naval gentleman, and again, we've got that gorgeous smile. So I wanted to share that one. So we also have a number of trowels. And again, some of the details, we do have photos so you can sort of look at them more closely. But some of the details are quite fascinating. And as we go through, you'll see the one that's sort of come into focus now actually has a milk handle. So that proved to be a learning point for one of the team today, because Ronnie and myself were discussing whether it was a milk handle or an ivory handle, and Therese, who is our archives assistant, had never encountered such a thing. And so we thought, well, this is a wonderful learning opportunity. And we sort of explained that back in the day, they would use sort of milk byproducts to sort of, you know, bake on handles and what have you. And if you didn't see ivory, you might be confused as to whether they were ivory handles or this milk byproduct. But because we've seen those ivories from some of the previous slides ago, you can actually tell the ivory is still incredibly white decades upon decades later, and yet these handles are faded quite significantly. So that's why I'm reasonably confident that they are milk handles. So, and another still photo of that, which we can always.
Sorry, I missed it. What is the occasion that these trowels get presented for?
Often when they were starting to build a new building, so it'd be the turning of the earth. I think today you would probably see more spades in those situations, but often these trowels they're hand engraved, and some of them are incredibly delicate. Like if I actually go back to the previous one and just play that video again, you might be able to see just the level of detail that's been written on. This one with the milk handle is actually very, very pretty when you get close to it. And so they would often be engraved. They were more ceremonial than actually being used, and they've fallen out of fashion today as
They
well.
usually indicate different occasions. Cardinal Pell has a commemorative shovel at the university chaplaincy from turning the sod. The trowel is used for laying the first stone rather than turning the sod before earthworks are done. So they're different occasions.
There you go. Thank you. Now, I have a question for you all. Would anyone like to tell me about this particular hat?
It looks like a doctoral biretta.
It does. Now, this is where it's interesting. When you can see it's actually coded, so I have the coding for that tells us what it's linked to in terms in the database and what have you. But because I was working on these slides, my computer has been pushed to the edge and it wouldn't open the database at the same time that I sort of had the slides out. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to just put it out to everyone else and see what you think that hat is. And I can always confirm afterwards when I can actually get back into my database again and double check it. I'm inclined to think that, but we also wondered whether it was to do with one of the special papal orders as well, and we were curious about that. So, but I thought we have very knowledgeable people here this evening, and I thought they might just know off the top of their head.
Certainly a very jolly head garment, isn't it?
It is. It is, and it's quite different to some of the others that we have. And it has a very nice feel to it. I think it has faded dramatically. Like if we play the video again, look at the color as it is. It's quite pink, and yet when whoops, sorry, it's done that. Okay. But when we flip it over, you'll see it's incredibly red underneath. So I wonder how much it's faded. Right. It's quite curious, I thought.
What makes me hesitate to say that it's definitely academic is that a doctoral biretta normally has the same four sides as a liturgical biretta, and I've never seen a doctoral biretta with fringes configured like that. There's lots of, like you say, jolly ones, but I've not seen one like this in an academic setting.
Yeah.
Could it be a gift?
That's possible too. It was in with his vestments, but it is going to take a little bit of digging up because these are very old accession numbers as well. So it's not like they're easily listed in a particular box or anything like that. They're itemized out quite separately. So if I try and put in the code, for example, that I have on the reverse, I'm actually bringing up hundreds of possibilities in the database. So always needs a bit more drilling down. But I thought it was too good not to share with you all.
Lienntje, could I ask, Christopher Flynn, we just saw the printed note inside the hat. Are you able to turn it over and show us that again?
Yes, certainly. I can even try and pause, but if you bear with me. Oh, and it just
It's
jumped.
gone again.
Oh dear, it's difficult.
So unfortunately, pausing, I've probably made the video just a bit too high.
Yes. Look, can you stop it so that we can read it just keeps turning round and round. It's upside down.
Academic hood, cap and gown.
Yes, can you turn it the other way round so it's upside down? It's
there's another one on the opposite side. Just
well, there is. It's a Spanish Basque name. Luz Urrutia, which it went upside down.
Feliciano.
Urrutia is a Basque name. I think Cardinal Gilroy has been given possibly the University of Navarre or some Catholic university has given him an honorary doctor's degree. Yeah, we have a very good friend in England who died last year, and he had been, not long before that, given a splendid honorary degree at the Autónoma University in Madrid, a very decorative doctor's hat in turquoise green with fringes. So I think it's a Spanish custom.
Yeah, look, I think it is too, probably.
Yeah.
It could be looked up. I'm sure you can look it up on the internet, but that's given the Basque name of the maker. It looks like that.
Yes, and I will come back to Richard when I'm able to sort of see what we have. You know, just going back to that New Zealand Inkwell stand, for example, in the database, it did not have the power listed at all. Nobody knew what the substance was. And so we do have gaps in knowledge and what we surmise. So anytime we learn something, it's great to be able to sort of add to the story just that little bit more. You know, as you can imagine, we're not sort of experts in all sorts of things. Like now and again, I sort of think I need to get a very senior priest to come through and just look at certain items to be able to give us more of a sense of its background. Okay. I was fascinated with this. I loved the shoes. There is no arch support in these shoes. They're beautifully made, but I don't imagine they would have been stunningly comfortable to go long distances in. And we were very surprised at just how many socks we had. And so the ones on the right, they measure about 70 centimeters long. And I can only imagine that it's very cold in winter at the Vatican, and they would have been wonderfully warm. They're incredibly well made out of wool. Some of the other socks are far less so, and I suspect they're very local for the time, but they were fascinating. Now, the gold tassels do not show up at all well, but they certainly are quite stunning to see up close when they catch the light. And of course, we have a stock as well. So I thought might just be a little bit interesting. Now, unfortunately, our next one includes me. Now, this, I cannot describe the luxuriousness of the material that was made and put together so that things could be stored in it. And it's quite, unfortunately, the picture doesn't really give, it's about 50 centimeters long and about 50 centimeters wide. And it's quite lovely with his name on it. So I thought I'd have that as well. And this one, I just see how that sort of plays. Again, it was incredibly silky. As you know, we've been wearing gloves because it's so easy to, even if you've got very clean hands, to still damage things. But it was just so much more luxurious than I had anticipated. So I thought this might just give you a little bit of an idea. And I thought they were all buttoned, but I was really surprised to find the domes. Was that something that you would have expected or not so much? So it actually, to me, it had quite a modern look to it. So I thought it was very interesting. So we have a photo in Rome, and I thought it was just lovely with the Vatican behind, and again you can actually see the shot silk, and that sort of ties into one of our last frames as well.
Lienntje,
yeah,
that photo is reversed.
Oh, is it?
Good eye, Sev.
Because the rays on the Beretta should be on the other side.
So that's,
and I've pointed it out to the
I've
Catholic
scanned it.
how many times, but it's fallen on deaf ears. He'd be horrified.
Oh, that's interesting, because I've scanned that. And so do you think it's the scanning process that's done that, or the picture itself?
I think the picture's been reversed.
Oh.
So I know the Catholic Weekly ran it a while ago, and I wrote to them and said that it's been reversed, but of course, no.
That's the collection I got it out of, was the Catholic Weekly collection. So I'm using the same image. So it's not like there's lots of them out there. It must be the same image.
Yeah, it's been reversed.
Yeah, I just thought it was angles. I wondered, but I just thought, oh, it's angles, and I don't claim expertise. So, oh, that is interesting.
You can also see the ring is on what should be the other hand, and the vertical part of the fascia in this photo is on the right side, where it would normally be on the left.
Well spotted. I am going to make notes on that, and I'm also going to have it with the picture if they choose to use it in the future. It will be pointed out to them. That doesn't mean they may not use it, but at least the background to that will actually be. Thank you very much for that.
I mean, it could in fact have been reversed in the processing, that it could have just been projected the wrong way when it was first printed from the negative. And, you know, that's how these things happen. It's also interesting to see, I mean, what looks like chairs all set out in St. Peter's Square, presumably for some major papal event.
Yes. That has been most interesting. Thank you very much for that. I've got this picture where he's also formally dressed as well. And one of the other things that I wanted to show you was just what the robes looked like. Now, this is not great, and And we did film it a number of times, but I hope it gives you a sense of scale. And we're not trying to have it all perfectly correctly or anything like that. We just wanted to give you an idea of what the silk looked like and the patterns in the silk and the sheer length of the train. And I hope that comes across. It was quite extraordinary. I had not considered just how that would work and how large it was. And the condition that it is in is quite stunning. You could wear that today with a bit of an iron, I think, but I think it looks really quite beautiful. And just wanted another couple of photos and one with the family, which I thought was just lovely. So that sort of brings me to the end of my little whistle stop tour. And I really wanted to acknowledge Brother John Luttrell's book called Norman Thomas Gilroy, An Obedient Life. And I've been using that quite extensively, as you can imagine. I would like to thank Sev for his wonderful stories and for bringing His Eminence to life for me, and Richard for troubleshooting tonight's Zoom meeting. And I'd also like to thank my team. I am truly blessed with the archivists that I work with, and they have been really wonderful in terms of thinking of, hey, I think somebody might find this interesting.